So we're going to start. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I'm Chrissy Wozniak, and welcome to this webinar, Farm Equipment Repairs, Getting to the Root of the Problem with ERD President Glen Flaherty. And he's presenting the webinar today, and he's a man with great insight into this area that spent his entire life in this electronics and repair business. And he has advice for producers who are tackling fixing their own equipment and ruling out things that they can fix or if they need help. So his company ERD has 20 plus years of experience in refurbishing legacy and new electronics. Following Glen's presentation, we're going to hold a Q&A session. So feel free to add questions as you think of them during the presentation. And then at the end, we'll go through all of them. So from Kernersville, North Carolina, I want to welcome President of ERD, Glen Flaherty. Welcome, Glen, and thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Chrissy. Thanks for having me on here. As Chrissy said, I've been in the electronics business a little while. Personally, I don't know where the last 30 years went, but somehow I woke up and it's been 30 years. So I've spent most of my time in the service of complex electronics, in manufacturing and food processing. We've done work for cruise ships, all kinds of stuff. So if it's electronic, we've pretty much taken a look at it. And today I'm talking about farm equipment and trying to give some guidance for you out there on the farm on things that you can do to help lower your costs on maintenance and get back up and running when you need the time to get back up and running. So we're going to talk a few minutes first about the evolution of modern farm equipment and modern technology, sort of, it follows along. So obviously the farming has been around for tens of thousands of years. And, you know, for a long time, people had horses, mechanical equipment behind horses, you know, fairly straight up to fix. You could sharpen that blade on your plow and fix the wooden handles and do leather work and make sure you fed the horse. That's kind of important, a lot of horse maintenance. And over the years, you know, they started adding more technology, such as, you know, when the advent of diesel and gas engines start automating tractors, reapers, and all the mechanical equipment. Well, the mechanical age, obviously, you could use hand tools and some small automated tools and do a lot of your own repair, fixing the mechanical aspect. But over the past 20 years, as everything else in life, it seems, the technology has just crept its way in every aspect of life. And now, you know, you have tractors that are controlled by GPS satellite tracking and automated equipment that will measure the height of the cut as you're going through the field. So obviously hand tools and basic mechanical knowledge now also requires some element of understanding the electronics on your equipment. So over the past few years, as we've been growing, we have been doing more and more direct work for the farm industry for individual farmers. Previously, we had a lot of work coming from processing people, Tyson chicken processing plants or grain processing. But over the past 3 to 4 years, we've been working more directly with right at the farm and working on the equipment right at the farm. So what we've discovered and had a lot of conversations with farmers during this process is trying to help out to help you get the results you need on your maintenance and getting your equipment back up and running. So the stages that I laid out, and you should see it if you looked at our advertising for this, is what kind of initial steps do you need to take when you're experiencing a failure? Now, from a standpoint of a service provider like myself, or the original equipment manufacturer, or anybody else who's going to help you with your equipment. One of the most important tools you have is documenting what the failure is and the steps that you go through as you're trying to get it back up and running. A lot of time here in Kernersville, we spend a lot of time with our customers over the phone or over email, trying to solve the mysteries of what happened, how it happened, and how we need to move and get it fixed. So if you have a failure, one of the first things you can do is take a note of what happened and when it happened and what you first saw. And then you can start ruling out what we call the easy problems. So on advanced electronics, there's a handful of things that you're going to encounter that we would consider the easy. So for example, a blown fuse, a dead battery, open wires. Now, a lot of these can be caused by wear and tear, mechanical vibration, or a lot of things we run into with farms lately are vermin, mice, rats. Somebody's chewing a wire. We get a lot of people telling us about animals crawling inside their equipment. So to help with ruling out those problems and fixing those easy problems, I have a handful of items here that we use that every farm should have. And of course, the handy dandy, making sure I can see this in here, voltmeter, ohm meter. You know, this is a Fluke. You know, there's a lot of brands. This allows you to check for power, where it's at, where it's not at, and resistance to see if there's opens. A thermal probe or a thermometer. This is a digital one. There's a lot of digital ones out there, they're very affordable. As an added feature of an add-on for this Fluke meter is a current clamp. Now, with these three basic instruments, you should be able to rule out a large percentage of the easy failures that occur on modern farming equipment. So you want to go and you want to open up your equipment and you want to look for the obvious. Use your senses, at least 4 of them, where you want to use your sight. You want to listen to the problems if the item is running. Smell. Smells are something, you can smell burning wires. You can smell something that isn't right. And of course, touch. I wouldn't use touch except with this thermometer, because if you're working with some sort of electrical motor or gas or diesel engine, it might get really hot. But you can use this thermal probe to do the touch for you. So when I'm out in the field, which I have done a number of over the years, equipment out in the middle of nowhere, like at a farm, when you go there, start with the obvious. What is it doing? What is it not doing? Is it dead? And then you can take your basic equipment and start working backwards. What's missing? So on the farm equipment that we get in, a lot of it are diesel operated engines. So whether they have a Cummins engine or a Detroit diesel and the larger stuff, they're diesel engine that typically has an engine control, instrument control, and safety controls. Of all the equipment that we work on, the number one problem is typically sensor failures that can cause something to be missing to the electronics. So after you rule out the easy things, such as an open fuse, dead battery, missing power, the next thing to look at is to go to different inputs for the complex controls. So I have an example here. This is a John Deere instrument engine controller out of, I think this is, what did I say? This is out of a skid steer off a farm. It's a John Deere module. Basically, this runs the diesel engine. I believe it's a 100 horsepower. I don't think it's a very large engine on this particular skid steer. And a lot of these we get in, they have problems with the throttle control or the governors. So these outside pieces, either the foot pedal or the governor system, goes bad and it takes out this engine control. Or it's the only thing wrong and there's nothing wrong with this module. So we prefer at ERD to work on real problems, not units that somebody believes is bad, but it isn't. So we prefer our customers to know what their problem is. There's nothing worse than working on a module, sending it back to the customer. They plug it in and getting the dreaded call of it still doesn't work. So we put a lot of effort in our front end to talk to people about how did you go and diagnose this? How do you know it's this module? Did you swap it? Did you try another one, etc.? Did you check all the limit switches? So this is an example of an engine control. Second thing we see common in these kind of systems is this is out of a John Deere tractor. Now, this is a very common problem we get out of the farm industry where somebody, namely a mouse, was crawled inside the tractor during the winter when it wasn't being used, chewed through the wires, and when the farmer went and cranked it up, it made this burn spot right here and burnt through the board. And now this tractor is just parked because this is the main instrument cluster that'll even turn on the engine to turn on the tractor. So this one is got a lot of contamination from being dirty, but the actual real problem, if you can see this, is a burn hole through this, which you can see actually went through the board. This is actually fixable. We'll drill it out and fix the board. We also have to provide a new wiring harness for this tractor. Then the third thing that we run into are not necessarily problems that are keeping the equipment from working, but parts of the equipment that aren't working properly that cause issues out in the field. The most common problem we run into is you're on a piece of equipment, you're in the field, and you run out of fuel. And it's because your fuel gauge was not working properly, and now you're in the middle of a field and you have to go bring diesel out to the machine to basically get back up and running. So we fix a lot of clusters. This is a cluster right here. This is out of a wheel loader. So this is a John Deere also. I picked John Deere, a lot of John Deere ones. You can kind of see this is an instrument cluster. It's half apart right now. It's in the process of being rebuilt, where the actual fuel gauge, it came in with a bad fuel gauge. So they kept running out of fuel, and that's a real big problem, obviously, when you don't know you need fuel. So once again, what you need to do when you have a problem and you think it's electrical is try to narrow it down. If it's not an easy fix, if you can narrow it down to what you think the subsystem is. So is it engine control? Is it monitoring control? Is it attachment control, like on the accessories that go with a lot of this equipment? That way, when you go to want to find a solution from somebody like us or the dealer, or even just buying your own parts, you can make the choices wisely and pick on the things that you immediately need to repair. So another big problem, and this one is a little more complicated than just subassemblies, is in farm equipment and most things that we work on that is kept outside or used outside, is wiring harnesses. So this right here, you can see I can hold it up here, is the entire wiring harness out of a John Deere hay baler. So over time, as they're using it and baling hay, this harness, by the way it was designed with a joint in it and its length, tends to get brittle and you start to get opens. And then this one, I believe, is a square baler. So they're no longer square because it doesn't control the squaring mechanism correctly. And they get a loose bale. So basically they get a pile of hay. So that is something that you will run into that's a little more complicated. But once again, with the handheld meter, you can detect, do I have opens? Do I have breaks in that wiring harness? Is that my problem? And then you can address it. Usually with field repair, you can at least get up and running for a while, but we recommend, if you can, to replace the harness. Because once one wire starts breaking, that usually means they're brittle in general, and you're just going to have them breaking down the road more in different spots. So that's something that, you know, you can change out yourself depending on the complexity.
I have a question, Glenn.
Yeah.
Do you also sell do you make the wiring harnesses if people need to order them?
Yes. What we do is we have a separate system. It's a sister company that makes custom wiring harnesses. So on ones that are common for like this John Deere baler, we have them available as a stock item. But on any piece of equipment, as long as we have a wiring diagram we can get usually from the manual and some basic measurements, we can custom tailor and custom make a new wiring harness for almost anything. So if you look at this, this is not what the John Deere one looked like. This one's heat shrinked, so there won't be any contamination or water getting into connectors. We also add, this right here is a ferrite cores. So we add noise suppression so that they actually run smoother. You don't have all kinds of noise coming off of stuff. And then this webbing that we put on it is oil and water resistant. So we believe it's going to last a lot longer than the ones that use electrical tape and wrap them, which is the norm that you see in machines. So that's something that can be done in the field also on the farm. And as long as you can get it apart and get all the connectors off, that's something you can take off and put back on, usually on most equipment. And we can provide the custom service if needed, or just get one in general if that's the problem. Really, what we are push for here at ERD is the solution. So we want you to be up and running as soon as possible and as cost effective as possible, doing what you do best, which is farming. So whatever the problem may be, we're here to help in any way. But in general, if you follow the simple rules of checking for the simple things like fuses or dead batteries or bad connections, and you need to reach out to a service provider, give them, if it's not us, give them the information of what's going on. That's valuable. A lot of times we have one sentence that's the difference between an ordeal and taking a long amount of time to figure something out and getting right to the root of the problem and fixing the problem immediately. It's all about information. And in service, a lot of times it's that little piece of nugget of information that makes the difference between quick and not quick. You know, we unfortunately, all service providers are going to work this way. They need that info. So I'm here not just to represent my company, but to give you the guidance in how to make things more expeditious. The electronics industry is going to get deeper and deeper every year into all kinds of equipment in every aspect of life. So it's a problem that you're just going to have to find ways to deal with as you have problems and failures. And it's not going to disappear overnight. And to bring up, obviously, part of the story that we have with Farm Ag, of course, is the John Deere settlement, so to speak, of allowing right to repair, which has been, I know, with a lot of farmers in the grain belt, a big issue. For those who don't know, for many, many, many years, John Deere had what we would like to call a complete lock on servicing their equipment, in the sense that they wouldn't allow anybody but their service personnel to unlock software that would allow equipment to become operational again. So on the higher end equipment, oh, sorry about that. On the higher end equipment, you could buy a new module. You could install it into the thresher or whatever automated tractors or whatever big piece of John Deere you had, buy the equipment from them, put it in, and then they would have to send somebody out with a computer to plug in, type a few keys, enable it, and then you're off and running, which of course had a separate expense. There have been a lot of lawsuits, a lot of hand wringing, and a lot of stuff going on in the background for many years now, but they finally agreed to allow third parties and individual farms to be able to have access to that critical technology. Because no matter what service provider you go with, if you're locked out by the software and you don't have access to the software, we can give you new parts, we can make you new wiring harnesses, we can rebuild the electronics. But if it's locked out with some sort of software key, like they had at John Deere, well, then you have to go to them to get that part done. And that seems to be, I haven't seen the schedule for how they're going to start rolling out that info, but that is something they agreed to do starting this year, which is a big, big, important change in how electronics can be serviced. And that's going to start happening in other industries, and Apple's part of this problem too. And there's manufacturing companies that have this issue also. So that wall seems to be coming down due to, quite frankly, farmers. I mean, this is all a wellspring of a group of farmers pushing for, hey, this isn't fair. We bought the equipment. You know, why can't we fix our own stuff or work on our own stuff? Why are we locked out? So there's a lot of credit that goes to the farm people that have been pushing for this for a number of years, because it is going to roll into other people to help other people that didn't even know it was a problem, like cell phones with Apple, for example. So the end part here is, if you can't fix it simply, okay, and it's stuck, or you get it back to the barn or wherever your storage is, cover it up. Protect it from the elements. If you come up with an idea that it's this module, cover it up, cover up any of the connectors, get your module repaired or try to buy a replacement, whatever strategy you have to get that equipment. But when you have it half apart, make sure you cover it, because we've seen, unfortunately, real long delays due to parts issues, which all of you are probably familiar with, shortages over the past couple of years. There's still some out there in the electronics where you can't get the replacement parts to fix the stuff in less than 2 or 3 months. And you don't want that equipment sitting out there half open, exposed, without at least covering it, so that when you go to open it up again, you don't have to deal with a new set of issues when you put the parts back in. So that's the overall main point of this that I wanted to go through. Chrissy, you want to throw some more questions out there, or do we have any questions? I personally am the kind of guy that likes answering questions coming from people, because I want that I can't predict what you need knowledge on, but if you tell me by asking questions, I'm happy to provide whatever answers I can give.
For sure. One thing I'm curious about is, breakdowns are obviously inevitable. So what are some good practices that producers can adopt to ensure that they're ready for a breakdown in the field? They're not always, near the shop where they have this equipment that you suggest.
Okay, well, to have just not the basic tools that we have here, like the meter and this other stuff, what you really want to do is have all the service manuals that you can get for your equipment on hand. Okay, it makes it quicker. It allows you to go through, a lot of manufacturers have a decent checklist of maintenance that you can use to rule out the easy. They'll tell you to monitor or measure with a meter at certain points. So when you go to buy a new piece of equipment, you really, before you sign that check, say, hey, can you throw in all the service manuals for this? Because you want those manuals. Those manuals are current to that serial number. A lot of changes happen. We see it with John Deere equipment, where if you have one unit that's 1999 and another one that's 2005, they may look the same, but they're not the same. So when you get new equipment, ask for the service manuals. When you add a new piece of equipment that may be used to you, reach out and try to get the service manuals. Any piece of documentation that you can have, and it's near, in your maintenance area, you can then use what the manufacturer suggests for checking out and ruling out the easy. Plus you have access to the part numbers of the modules and what they're described. So you can give a call to a service provider like myself and say, hey, I think my XYZ module is bad, and we can help you out and go, oh, that's a whatever it is, and give you some tips. But that's something you definitely want to get if you don't already have it. And absolutely, before you sign for new equipment, that's your moment to ask for it. Right then.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any salesperson is going to make sure that that gets done to make the sale, right? So that's a great bargaining chip.
We have worked for many years with manufacturers that spend $2 or $3 million worth of money on a piece of equipment, and they don't ask for it. And it's like, why would you spend millions of dollars on a piece of manufacturing equipment and not ask for the basic manual? I never really figured that one out, but that happens all the time. But you can control that. Plus, there are online resources now, which 20 years ago didn't exist, where you can download an entire manual for Cat, John Deere, your basic brands, your premium brands, pay $50 or $100 and have it at least electronically. That can save you a lot of time and grief, and it's an investment well worth the money that they cost.
Right, absolutely. And you have some resources on YouTube as well, right?
Yes. So one of the things that we do at ERD is our repairs we put online. So we have 3 YouTube channels at this point in time. We have our main channel, which goes and talks about specific products and what they're out of and what we do to them. We have a channel that are just test videos. So if you sent us this instrument cluster right here out of a John Deere, after we're done repairing it, we'll video it running and send you a link of it running. We have a channel of just that. And we also have a channel of truck electronics being run in our Freightliner trucks, because we do a lot of control modules for semi trucks. So we have 3 channels, and we use videos to be able to share with our customers how and what we're doing. And also, we routinely get people sending us videos, which we say, hey, upload us a video when you have a problem. So if you have a weird problem on a piece of equipment and you've got this other tool, which I didn't say you need to buy this because probably everybody's got this smartphone right here at this point. Or if you don't, get one. Anything that can take a video of it. Send it to me or a service provider. We can work with that. We can work with pictures. We can work with listening to a way a diesel engine sounds and go, oh, that's probably a bad injector, or, an ignition knock on a gasoline and say, hey, maybe your ECU has a problem and one of the ignition outputs is bad. And then we can tell you how to use a meter to figure that out. So use the technology to help fix the technology. It's so simple now to capture a lot of data and then keep it and then share it. So with the videos, I'll routinely ask people in a complex situation, they'll want me to, go somewhere or, get on a plane and go somewhere. I'm like, okay, what you need to do is calmly, rationally take a video, explain what happened to me on the video, show me the equipment, and let me think about it. And many times I can give guidance on, oh, I think it's this area, or I think it's that area. Know your resources. I'm seeing a lot of service providers are now working that way, not just me, but the more information you can collect and write down or store, the quicker somebody can help you get back up and running. So from a tool standpoint, meters, a current clamp, that's always good stuff, goes in the meter. Temperature probe, cell phone that takes movies, manuals for your equipment. If you have that, you have all the basic tools you need to be able to diagnose most of your problems and narrow it down to the basic real problem. For the most part, there's always that exception. There's always going to be that ghost in the machine. We run into it sometimes where everything we're doing makes sense and it still doesn't work. That's unfortunately reality. We usually figure it out eventually, and it ends up being something really stupid that you just overlook. But for the most part, if you have these basic tools, you can not only knock out a lot of your problems quickly right there, but you can also have somebody you're working with help you and get the problem solved.
That's very good. We've got a question here from a viewer. Which manufacturer do you think is the easiest to fix, and which seem to break less frequently?
Oh, I could spend the rest of my life talking about the pros and cons on manufacturers. I really don't want to pick on anybody specifically. I will tell you that there are differences between, let's say, Caterpillar products and products that have names that I can't pronounce in terms of their quality. I don't want to specifically pick out names, but we work on thousands of manufacturers over the years, and we've seen a lot of changes over the years as production has moved somewhere else. And quality shows. One of the things that you could go and ask is, if you're looking at a piece of equipment and it's used, get the service records. How many hours over the service records? I mean, if you're buying a piece of equipment that's 3 years old, and when you ask the guy you're buying it from how much stuff have you had serviced, if he's got half an inch worth of receipts, that might be a good thing to say, maybe this brand isn't that hot. I'd like to dig deeper, but I will say that in all the years we've been working on things, the stuff still made in the United States is better. Honestly, we really do a better job of manufacturing things for the most part. So if you can get stuff that's, you're going to pay a premium. I'm not saying it's the cheapest, but it certainly lasts the longest. We work on a lot of European equipment, a lot of Asian equipment, and a lot of American equipment. They all have their shortcomings and their strengths and weaknesses. For the most part, American equipment can just be a pain to deal with the OEM. European equipment, they make some weird choices in how they make stuff. It's kind of like, the joke about German cars and wiring, sort of. And Asian, I mean, they have some shortcomings too. But for the most part, on a brand standpoint, I'm gonna go with American stuff. I mean, the John Deere equipment I got here in my hands, this board right here, if this was in some of the foreign equipment we've seen, it would be unrepairable.
Wow.
This we can repair.
Well, that's cool.
Hope that kind of answers. It's kind of a long way of saying I don't want to pick on anybody, but I
You're
think
right.
I think you kind of get my point in my answer.
For sure. We'll move on to the next one. How do you determine whether to rebuild or repair or just buy new replacements?
Okay, there's a couple factors. That's an absolutely wonderful question. 5 years ago, my answer to that question would have been very different. The landscape has changed a lot over the last 5 years because of shortages. So a lot of modules that you could buy 5 years ago for a lot of basic equipment like tractors and balers doesn't exist. So new is kind of off the table. So, and if it is available, the time windows are extended. So this cable right here, this baler wiring harness, which is not the most complicated harness in the world. I'm not going to make it more complicated than it is. It's pretty straightforward. I think as a lead time from John Deere, it's buyable. I think 9 months. I don't think you want your balers offline for 9 months. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
really. Good point.
And the electronics that we fixed, the instrument head that controls the baler, isn't supported at all. So you can't buy one. You can only get it repaired by somebody, and it's not going to be John Deere. So on equipment that's over 7 years, 8 years right now, your options are going to be either find a used one that's been refurbished or repair it. Now, I don't do refurbished sales. I know companies that do refurbished sales. Refurbish is a term that has a broad use of meaning. So what happens a lot of times, and I'm not going to point any fingers at specific companies, but a lot of times there are companies out there that will buy a piece of equipment and they'll strip it for the electronics. It's very common. They'll buy it in an auction. They'll spend, 5 cents on the dollar, buy a piece of equipment. They don't want the mechanicals or the frame or even the engine. They want the electronics. They take the parts off, they label it for that model, they put it on a shelf, and then they say it's for sale. That's the norm in the refurbish. In the repair arena, of course, I'm not the only provider, there are other people. The repair is an active, we're going to fix what's wrong with your module. By the act of doing that, we're going to be able to tell what may have happened with it in the first place. So if we have something that is obviously came from the outside world and damaged a module, we'll put it in our write-up and say, hey, you may want to check on this. You're not going to get that by just replacing a module or getting a refurbished one. You're also going to get the benefit of typically a longer warranty. Repair on our company is 3-year warranty. Refurbishments, usually you get a 60, 90, 180 day, depending on the company, warranty for whatever that is. So that's kind of where you're at right now on a lot of the market. There's some things you can buy new from the OEM that are available in a short window, but a lot of them just aren't. They're out. I mean, they may have a price for it, but go and order it and they'll come back and say, well, we'll take your deposit. You got 6 months to wait. So from the way we look at it at ERD, we don't want to tell people, hey, you got to park that piece of equipment for 6 months or a year. We really don't. We want to get you up and running. You know, our average turnaround time, we try to keep it within weeks, not months. You know, obviously there's times when that's not gonna happen, but we try to really push our work back to our consumer so they can get their job going.
Yeah, that's
That,
that's great. Yep. And the next question is, what's the process if I want to send something for repair to ERD?
okay, we're easy. We basically accept boxes every day. We didn't know we're coming. They just show up at our address. As long as we have a way to contact you, that's all we need. And what our process is if it's something that's in our catalog, which is our online catalog, it'll be that price. We have a searchable online catalog on our website with pricing. If it's something we've never seen, what happens is when it comes in, we'll log it in. We take pictures of everything that we get. We put it in our database. We'll do some research, figure out an appropriate quote number, and typically within 1 to 2 days, we'll get you a firm quote for doing the rebuild/repair. And then you prove it, and we just start the work. And then when we're done, we call you up and say, it's done. Can you pay us? And we ship it to you. And typically, if we have a video, we'll send you a link showing it work. We try to keep it as straightforward and as simple process as we can. Now, of course, you might get questioned by our people because we want some, hey, do you know what happened with this, or technical stuff? And that's so that we can do the best job.
Yeah, that's great. And the next one is, what are a few routine maintenance tips for machinery electronics?
Oh, there's several. Okay, so on outdoor equipment, which farm equipment is, you know, contamination, which you could call rust or corrosion, is something that you're never going to get away with because you're outside and you're in the elements. Anything exposed, you want to make sure you keep covered when you're not using it. Keep it covered when it's in the rain. If it has a cover, don't let covers get broken. A lot of times we see people leave that fender off or leave that cover off, and it just water gets in there and you get all kinds of corrosion and you start getting a whole bunch of problems. So the number one maintenance thing is make sure you got the covers in place when you're not using it. The second thing is, on an annual basis, if you put it away for the winter, obviously you winterize a diesel or gas engine. To winterize electronics out in the field, put a battery tender on it if you're going to keep the battery connected. Or if you're going to not put a battery tender, pull, if it has a 12-volt or 24 battery in it, take it out. Don't let it corrode all the terminals. It's okay to take it out, and then cover it. You know, if you're off the season and you're winterizing it, when you go to restart it up, you know, if there's a maintenance, if you buy the maintenance manual for the piece of equipment, there's usually a small checklist. Most equipment has it, of 1 or 2 pages, about pre-startup for the first time. Every time you take something out of, you know, winter storage, or you let it sit for a while, just go through that little procedure. It'll reveal to you if there's any little issues or big issues real quick. And then you can keep ahead of the curve. But corrosion is the number one thing from a preventative maintenance standpoint. It's a killer. And keep mice and rats out of your equipment. I know it's impossible, but those little vermin can really, I mean, they pee on it and it's amazing what that does.
Right.
Never mind on the wire, squirrels, any of those vermin. I don't know how to permanently cure that in general when you have a barn, but I guess get some more cats. I don't know, barn cats. I don't know. Maybe that should be a maintenance item you need for a farm, is a barn cat. It's a maintenance
Awesome.
tool.
Oh, okay. And the next one is, what are the main issues that you see, like top 3 when farmers send in their equipment for repair?
Okay, what you mean, the condition? I'm assuming that means
Must be main issues.
Yeah, okay, the main issues that we see is basically, first, the electronics has been doing its job day in, day out, year after year after year after year, and it needs to be rebuilt and just cleaned up. So from an age, our average age of stuff that we get in is between 10 and 20 years, and the stuff has never been worked on. So that speaks volumes to the earlier quality on some of this equipment. If you have a 20-year-old piece of equipment and now you're getting serviced, hey, that's not bad. You're not going to buy a new one, but you can get it serviced. So age, things start breaking down on the electronics. You get bad connections, bad caps, bad power supplies. It just ages. Okay, that's number one. Is the stuff is old. Number two, erosion and or animal damage. On the farm, that's actually very common to see somebody chewed something, or somebody peed on it or something along those lines, and it wreaks havoc with the electronics when they go and crank it up. The third thing that we see is, I guess, a mechanical failure that causes electrical damage. So if you have an electric motor and the bearing goes bad and it seizes, if you have some sort of variable speed control on that motor, which on modern equipment is quite common, it will usually damage it if it locks the rotor up. So if it seizes up, it'll probably pop the electronics. So we call that a blow up, but usually it's repairable. And that's something from the earlier question we discussed about where we were like the difference between repair, refurbish, and new.
Oh, right.
When you stuff blow up, we can go, hey, you really need to check that motor, because you might not know that that's what caused it. But a repair of your equipment will be, hey, before you plug this back in, you might want to check what it's attached to, which we do all the time, because we don't want it to come back broken again.
Right, exactly. Those are great points. So we've got one more here. So we'll do last call for questions. If anybody has any more, put them in now. This one, it says, I would recommend Scanner Danner Premium to any shop techs to learn how to diagnose the electronics, maybe aim towards automotive, but it applies to ag as well. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's it. That's basically like a mechanics tool. So if you have we use for our engine and analyzers, we use Detroit diesel. We do a lot of Detroit diesel engines, but this actually, we have the software suite that allows us to check most commercial diesel controls over like the OBD you have in a car. So having that diagnostic tool is good. If you can get it, the generic one, it'll work with the protocol. But see, a lot of equipment has custom protocols, so you have to be mindful. John Deere engines will have their own set of diagnostic data that may or may not work with a generic scan tool. So you got to make sure you have the ability to use their upper level coding. So what we do is actually, we kind of not going to use the word break the software, but we kind of figure out what the codes really mean and build our own front ends. So when we have like that custom stuff, we can pull in the data and then determine what it really means in the real world. Where a lot of OEMs, you have to buy their scan tools, which, would be a problem if you had every. But I do agree, having a generic one, if you have a lot of diesel engines that have diagnostic ports, if you can find one that can cover a lot of them, that is useful, because you can, at least on the engine electronic side, be able to determine if you have a bad injector or timing issues or whatever with the actual engine. But that's for an advance. That's not covering it easy. And of course, as I said, you have to be careful that the tool can cover what your equipment is.
Right. Yeah. And he clarified too that it's also a class, or is class, that you can take.
Right.
Awesome. All right. Any further questions then from anybody? And anything you want to close with, Glenn?
Well, I hope I've given you at least one thing to think about. If the only thing you remember in maintaining your own equipment is information is really the most important thing. With basic tools, if you can make it a story that you can make sense of in what's happening, what's not happening, and share that when you need help with the service provider or the OEM of equipment, you're going to get your equipment serviced faster and be back up and running quicker the more information you keep track of. Now, whether it's using this cell phone, index cards, heck, if you have a little pad, whatever, if you can get information to somebody when you need the help, it's going to make it quicker and make your life less frustrating by a lot.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's excellent points. A few weeks ago, my irrigation system went down one of the zones, and I watched YouTube videos. I tried to figure it out myself. And when I finally gave up and called somebody in, when he pulled in the driveway, I said, okay, I've changed the solenoid. I know I can manually open the valves. I've switched the electronics from zone to zone. So I know it's not with the box, because I can get it to work. It's just something with that zone or the wire. That's what I've narrowed it down to. He said, thank you so much. He was in and out in 5 minutes. It was just the wire. So he would have had to spend the time to do all of those things, right? So I totally get that it's good to narrow it down yourself.
Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is pay for service calls that could be a lot shorter. You don't want somebody there for a whole day when it could be simple, as you said, in 5 minutes. Do your homework, know your equipment, and keep track of what the issues are.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, to keep track of it and make a little book, a little story of what you've done already to hand over to the next person, right?
Yeah, and please don't spend a lot of money on equipment without asking for a service manual and possibly software. I mean, please don't. Just do it. They'll give it to you. Believe me, they want you to buy their equipment.
That
They really do.
totally makes sense. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for all this information. This is great. And thanks to everybody who's watching. If you want to connect with Glenn and ERD, you can head over to industrialrepairstore.com. And tomorrow we'll also send you a copy of the recording in case you want to review or share the webinar with somebody else. And thank you guys so much. Have a great night.